It is a generally accepted rule of polite Anglican society that luncheon at the vicarage must neither offend the stomach nor provoke the nerves. It is, after all, the great bastion of lukewarm conversation, tepid Madeira, and morally inoffensive consommé. It was therefore something of a violation of ecclesiastical etiquette when Canon Trevor's guest collapsed into his dish of bouillon precisely 2½ spoonfuls in, face first, with a gurgle not usually associated with clerical repose. The vicarage of All Souls, Lesser Hinckley, was a modest affair of moss-eaten gables and determined begonias, inhabited by Canon Bertram Travers, his harried sister Eugenia, and a housekeeper named Mrs. Goble, who had once served briefly under a viscount and never failed to remind guests that she had refused a pension on principle. That particular Tuesday's luncheon had been convened in honor of the Reverend Mr. Jasper Garnock, a florid man whose only apparent talent lay in his sonorous conviction when condemning the morals of youth from a pulpit as large as his waistcoat. Lord Peter Wimsey had been invited only by accident, or, more precisely, he had been foisted upon the occasion by a combination of poor handwriting and a positively misleading remark by the bishop's secretary, who had referred to Wimsey as deeply concerned with ecclesiastical matters, by which he had meant Wimsey's fondness for rare medieval hymnals, and not, as Canon Travers assumed, any particular reverence for the Church's earthly hierarchy. In any case, Wimsey had turned up, bright-eyed and absurdly early, wearing a waistcoat of questionable hue and carrying under one arm the exegetical ramblings of St. Bathilda the Mild, which, he insisted, had a most invigorating theory about transubstantiation and poultry. He had been seated somewhat awkwardly between Miss Eugenia Travers, whose corsets had opinions of their own, and Garnock himself, who smelled faintly of rhubarb jam and suspicion. The conversation had just turned toward the architectural integrity of post-Reformation lich gates when Garnock had made a curious hiccuping noise, grasped at the air like a drowning man reaching for misplaced theology, and collapsed in a manner both dramatic and final. "Oh dear," said Wimsey mildly, peering over his monocle. "The soup appears to have disagreed with him. I hope it wasn't the consommé. One hates to accuse a broth of murder. Still, I believe he's rather beyond the curative power of bicarbonate." Mrs. Goble let out a short shriek. Canon Travers, aghast, attempted to both bless the deceased and summon help with the same hand, which resulted in an unfortunate sloshing of wine. Miss Eugenia flung a napkin over Garnock's head with a decisiveness born of generations of moral rectitude, while Wimsey, with the faintest twitch of amusement, removed the fallen man's spoon and laid it gently aside. It took some time to rouse the village constable, a slow-moving man named Polkenhorn, who had once arrested his own cousin for fishing without a license and never quite recovered from the social ramifications. He peered at the body, scratched the tip of his nose, and announced, "Looks to be dead, my lord." "Indeed, Sergeant," said Wimsey. "An acute observation, though one might hope for greater specificity in the post-mortem. Heart, lungs, poison, we have options aplenty." "Poison, did you say?" asked Canon Travers in a whisper, as though saying the word aloud might conjure up arsenical spirits in the cucumber sandwiches. Wimsey said nothing, but walked to the sideboard, where the soup tureen steamed with innocent malice. He tilted the lid, sniffed delicately, then turned to Mrs. Goble. "Madam, might I ask, out of sheer pedantry, how long was this soup allowed to simmer, and was it reheated perchance after the first boil?" Mrs. Goble drew herself up to the full moral height of her apron. "Sir, I've served soup for 30 years, without so much as a stomach cramp in my household. Precisely why your version of events interests me. You see, the difference between a well-prepared consommé and a fatal misjudgment may rest on the merest pinch of salt or strychnine." A small, embarrassed silence fell over the room, broken only by the ticking of the Staffordshire clock and a low wheeze from Garnock, which turned out to be the soup settling. Wimsey tapped his chin. The late Mr. Garnock, as I recall, had something of a penchant for moral absolutism, but how curious that he should expire at the table of the man whose appointment to All Souls he so recently opposed in the Ecclesiastical Gazette. Curious, don't you think? Canon Travers turned pale. But surely you don't suggest— I suggest nothing, said Whimsy brightly. Only that theology may not be the only thing simmering in Lesser Hinckley. Now, if you'll permit me, I'd like to have a word with your gardener. The gardener, said Miss Eugenia. Yes, said Whimsy. One always begins with the gardener. It's practically canonical. Whimsy, as was his wont when matters of sudden death and suspicious luncheon fare arose, had already slipped outside while the constable remained crouched beside the soup-spattered body, laboriously scribbling into his notebook with the sort of solemnity typically reserved for inscribing headstones. The vicarage garden, which Miss Eugenia proudly referred to as devoutly English, and which Whimsy privately considered a study in horticultural anxiety, sloped unevenly toward a privet hedge that partitioned the grounds from the churchyard. Here, amidst the drooping foxgloves and resentful cabbages, Whimsy found the gardener in question, a wiry man with the leathery skin of someone who had wrestled with more rose-thorns than conversations. He was crouched beside a bed of delphiniums, snipping deadheads with the intense moral focus of a monk, illuminating a manuscript. "Good afternoon," said Whimsy cheerily, as if death by soup were the most natural consequence of luncheon. "Would you happen to be Mr. Spinks?" The man squinted up at him. "Aye, if you're here about the black spot on the dahlia stems, I've already sprayed him." "Alas, no," said Whimsy. "I come on more lugubrious business. The Reverend Garnock appears to have mislaid his breath, rather permanently, and there's a growing consensus that it wasn't purely voluntary." Spinks lowered his shears and sniffed. "Didn't like him," he said without inflection. "Went round last month telling folk my worm compost was an abomination unto the Lord. Said I was worshipping nature instead of tending it. Only vicar I ever knew who made tomatoes feel judged." "Curious standard of piety," murmured Whimsy. "Tell me, Mr. Spinks, do you frequent the kitchen?" "Never set foot," said Spinks. "Mrs. Goble runs that place tighter than the Book of Leviticus. Wouldn't even let me use her sink to rinse my gloves after the slug pellets." "Then might I trouble you with a question of culinary logistics?" asked Whimsy. "Hypothetically, if one wished to introduce an additive into a tureen of soup shortly before serving, say, something disagreeable to a fellow's long-term prospects, would one need access to the stove, or merely to the dining room at a key moment?" Spinks thought for a long moment, picking at a callus on his thumb. "They brings the tureen out a good 10 minutes before sitting, I reckon, to let it stand a bit. She's funny that way. Says food should breathe before it feeds." "Charming," said Whimsy. "Like a sacrament with aromatics." Spinks scratched his chin. "You could slip something in it then, I suppose, if no one was watching. But you'd have to be quick, and the door creaks." "Ah," said Whimsy, eyes narrowing. "Now that is the sort of acoustic trivia one learns only from a man who appreciates silence. Thank you, Mr. Spinks. If you think of anything else, such as any new faces around the house lately, or anyone with a peculiar interest in condiments, do let me know." He left Spinks to his delphiniums and wandered slowly back toward the house. A pigeon flapped irritably overhead, and the church bell, decidedly out of practice, gave a lugubrious clang as if lamenting its own involvement in the moral dramas of the living. Inside, the atmosphere had thickened. Garnock's body had been respectfully removed to the drawing-room, where Mrs. Goble insisted he remain upright and composed until the coroner could arrive. The soup had been seized as evidence, and Constable Polkinghorne was now interrogating Miss Eugenia with the careful hesitancy of a man who once tried to question a bishop about missing communion silver and had been offered 3 pages of Job in reply. Whimsy waited until the constable had grown distracted by the mention of garnishes, then slid into a narrow corridor off the kitchen. A door there led into the scullery, which was dark, redolent of wet stone and bleach, and quite devoid of witnesses. He examined the shelf where the tureen would have rested before serving. No marks, no residue, but the scent here was sharp, not wholly of soup. He followed the odor to a low bin half concealed beneath a curtain. Peering inside, he lifted out a small brown bottle, unlabeled, dusty, and faintly sticky around the lip. He raised it to his nose and frowned. Not strychnine. Something subtler. Perhaps digitalis? Or belladonna? Yes, deadly nightshade would do nicely, though one hates to think the garnish outlasted the guest. He slipped the bottle into his pocket and returned to the dining room where Canon Travers had collapsed into a chair, clutching a napkin as though it were all that stood between him and spiritual collapse. "My dear Whimsy," the canon moaned. "I cannot imagine how this happened. He was odious, certainly, but one doesn't expect divine retribution to operate through soup." Whimsy patted him lightly on the shoulder. "God seldom poisons Canon. He prefers thunderbolts or occasional tax audits. No, this has all the hallmarks of premeditated human mischief." "But who?" The canon's voice dropped. "You can't think anyone in this household." "Think?" said Whimsy, smiling faintly. "Heavens, no. I've merely noticed a few irregularities. For example, your sister mentioned that Garnock arrived late this morning, yes?" "Yes," said the canon. "The train was delayed. He telephoned from the station around 10 and didn't arrive until 11:15. "Curious," said Whimsy. "Because the soup, according to Mrs. Goble, was prepared this morning before 8 and kept under cover, which means anyone with access between 10 and 12 might have had a brief opportunity, especially if, say, our late friend was upstairs washing his hands or—" "But he didn't go upstairs," interrupted Miss Eugenia, suddenly appearing in the doorway, eyes bright as though she'd caught someone misquoting psalms. "He was in the garden from the moment he arrived until luncheon. I saw him myself." "Indeed?" said Whimsy, turning to her with genuine interest. "Alone?" "No," she said, hesitating. "I believe—" "Yes, he was speaking to a visitor, a woman." Whimsy's eyebrows shot up. "What sort of woman?" Miss Eugenia's nostrils flared at the memory. "The sort who wears crimson lipstick in the daytime and pretends to be interested in gardening. She said her name was Miss Lanyon and that she had questions about the church roof tiles, but she asked Jasper Garnock, not my brother." Whimsy's smile widened like a cat presented with a canary in a thimble. "Miss Lanyon, you say? Intriguing. Was there any affection in the air?" "Certainly not," snapped Miss Eugenia. "Unless you call hissing through clenched teeth affectionate. They seemed at odds." "I shall like very much to meet Miss Lanyon," said Whimsy. "There's nothing like a surprise appearance by a woman of mystery just before luncheon to curdle one's consommé." He turned to the canon. "One final question, dear man. Did Garnock touch anything else before the soup was served? Any tea, sherry, bread rolls, sacred relics?" "Only the salt," said Travers. "He always salted things before tasting them. Said life was too short for blandness." Whimsy laughed softly. "Ah, yes. Salt. The universal purifier and occasional assassin's assistant. I wonder, then, if Mrs. Goble reuses the salt cellars between guests?" The canon looked bewildered, but Whimsy had already begun humming under his breath, something vaguely medieval and dissonant. He paced once around the room, tapped the dining table, and paused at the sideboard. "I think," he said finally, "we may be dealing not with a crime of opportunity, but one of choreography. Someone arranged this quite carefully, down to the second, and the seasoning." He walked to the door, paused, and looked back. "Tell me, does Miss Lanyon reside in the village, or was she simply passing through?" "I don't believe she lives here," said Miss Eugenia. "She struck me as the sort of woman who prefers cocktails to evensong." "Delightful," said Whimsy. "Then I shall follow the scent of lipstick and ecclesiastical resentment. It's rarely a false lead." And with that, Lord Peter strode off into the faint sunshine of Lesser Hinckley, trailing just the scent of mystery behind him. Lord Peter's first call was to the vicarage's unofficial epicenter of information, the Red Lion Inn, a building whose very beams seemed to groan with the weight of village gossip. The barmaid, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Tippet, was polishing glasses with a vigor that suggested either a particularly stubborn spot or a desire to keep her hands busy amid idle tongues. "Miss Lanyon, you say?" she said without looking up. "A right odd one, that. Came in just yesterday, asking questions about the church roof and looking like she'd swallowed a bad oyster. Said she was from London, but she don't strike me as the tourist type." "Londoner, you say? And what about her connections? Did she mention any family in Lesser Hinckley?" Whimsy inquired, adjusting his hat with the faintest curl of a smirk. Mrs. Tippet shrugged. She kept her cards close, but I did hear she was to meet the vicar, Jasper Garnock, before luncheon. They had a bit of a heated chat out in the garden, according to young Tom, who said he saw her storming off just as the soup was being served. "That is suggestive," murmured Whimsy, tapping the counter thoughtfully. "And who might this Tom be?" "Tom Jenkins, the apprentice gardener," she replied. "Boy's got eyes like a hawk, but a tongue not much slower." Before Whimsy could press for more, a loud commotion erupted outside. The landlord was shouting at a belligerent drifter whose appearance suggested he had just stumbled through every muddy ditch between London and here. "Keep the peace, Joe," Whimsy interjected as the man turned his wild gaze on him, though I must confess, a stranger with mud on his boots and a penchant for disorder does rather enliven a quiet village day. The drifter sneered but said nothing. Whimsy's eyes narrowed, suspecting the man might know more than he let on. "Tell me, have you recently encountered a Miss Lanyon? She's a lady of some interest in these parts." The drifter laughed, a sound like gravel rolling down a hill. "Lanyon? Nah. But I saw her yesterday all right. Storming about, red lips and sharp words. Not the sort of dame to cross without reason." Whimsy nodded. "Indeed. And do you know if she had any quarrels with Mr. Garnock?" The man's face flickered briefly with something like regret. "Might say that, yes. She called him a fraud. Said he was hiding something in that church of his. Made a right scene." "Thank you," said Whimsy. "You've been most helpful." Back outside, Whimsy's mind churned. The idea of Miss Lanyon branding the vicar a fraud suggested deeper undercurrents than mere theological disputes. But what could she have been seeking among the ancient tiles and shadows of the church? A short walk brought Whimsy to the edge of the village churchyard, where the sun slanted through the yew trees and lent the gravestones a ghostly sheen. The church itself was a proud Gothic confection, all pointed arches and stained glass windows, with the unmistakable air of a building hiding more secrets than sermons. Whimsy paused at the porch, noting the odd glint of a window left ajar near the vestry. He stepped inside. The cool air scented faintly of incense and old books. The pews were empty, but the silence held a promise of revelation. His eye caught a dusting of footprints on the stone floor near the vestry door, despite the recent rains. Kneeling, Whimsy examined them carefully. The prints were fresh, no more than hours old, and suggested a woman's delicate shoe. He turned to the altar, noticing for the first time a curious pattern in the sunlight filtering through the stained glass. A series of small cracks in the glass, almost imperceptible, but catching the light just so. They formed a faint lattice pattern, somewhat resembling a map. A logical mind might find significance here. Suddenly, the church door creaked, and Whimsy turned sharply. Standing there was Miss Eugenia, looking pale but determined. "You're poking about the church, Lord Peter. I should warn you it's been said the place holds a curse." "Curse, my dear Miss Eugenia," Whimsy replied, arching a brow. "One tends to be wary of curses, especially when they come with an insufficient number of asterisks or footnotes." She smiled, faintly. "It's just superstition. but you might want to speak to old Mr. Bramble, the sexton. He's been there all his life and has a few tales about Miss Lanyon and the vicar." "Thank you, that is excellent advice." The sexton was a stooped man with fingers as gnarled as the church's ancient yews. His eyes, sharp beneath bushy brows, flicked over whimsy as if weighing a judgment. "Miss Lanyon," he said slowly. "She stirred up more than dust when she arrived. Ask yourself why a woman would come here, miles from London, to badger a man about his roof." Whimsy nodded. "Why indeed?" "Because the roof covers more than timber and lead," said Bramble, voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a crypt beneath the chancel. Old family's secrets are buried there." Garnock had cause to worry. This was a thread worth pulling. "And Miss Lanyon, did she ask about the crypt?" "She did, more than once. Said she was looking for something lost." Whimsy frowned. "The plot thickens, and so do the shadows beneath our feet." Later that afternoon, back at the vicarage, Whimsy sat with Mrs. Goble in the kitchen. The formidable housekeeper was fussing over her tea, a mound of evidence and misplaced indignation. "You don't think one of us could have done it?" she demanded. "We're a good household, apart from the vicar's temperament." "Ah, but murder is rarely a matter of temperament alone," said Whimsy. "It is often a precise calculus of resentment, opportunity, and a soup pot's timing." Mrs. Goble regarded him with suspicion. "You and your posh airs." He smiled. "I'll try to keep the posh to a minimum if you'll try to keep the secrets flowing." She hesitated, then sighed. "I suppose there was something odd about the day. The vicar was distracted, kept checking his watch and muttering about a letter he'd received." "Did you see this letter?" "No, but I heard Miss Eugenia saying it was postmarked London." Whimsy's thoughts turned to Miss Lanyon again. Could she have been delivering this letter? And what secrets might it contain that could turn a man's soup into a lethal potion? He rose, determination tightening like a glove. There were questions to ask, and time was, as ever, a cruel accomplice. The village clock began to toll 6, the sound echoing dully through the lanes. Whimsy looked out the window, eyes narrowing. Somewhere in Lesser Hinckley, a story was unspooling, a tale of secrets, lies, and a murder staged with the precision of a symphony. And Lord Peter Whimsy was just getting started. The village's evening hush settled over Lesser Hinckley as Lord Peter Whimsy made his way back to the vicarage. The stained glass windows, still faintly glowing from the waning daylight, seemed to cast an otherworldly tint on the ivy-clad stone walls, a fitting tableau for secrets whispered through generations. Yet, as ever, Whimsy's mind was attuned not to ghosts, but to the intricacies of human frailty and cunning. Inside, the vicarage was quieter now, the household subdued as if sensing the weight of the day's revelations. Mrs. Goble was clearing the remnants of tea with brisk efficiency, and a faint trace of tension lingered in her usually stern demeanor. "Lord Peter, I cannot help but feel there is more to Miss Lanyon's visit than mere curiosity about the church roof," she murmured as Whimsy settled into the well-worn armchair by the hearth. "The vicar's distracted manner and the letter, I dare say these are not unrelated." Whimsy inclined his head thoughtfully. "Quite so, Mrs. Goble. The letter, the crypt, the ill-timed quarrel. It all points to a disturbance beneath the veneer of this tranquil village life." He paused, tracing a finger along the rim of his teacup, eyes drifting toward the mantelpiece where a clock ticked unevenly. The seconds seemed to falter, as if time itself hesitated in this household of secrets. "Tell me, Mrs. Goble," Whimsy continued, "did the vicar receive many visitors in the hours preceding Miss Lanyon's arrival?" The housekeeper's lips pressed thin. Only Mr. Jasper's nephew, Robert Garnock, a rather sullen young man who arrived late in the morning. He had a brief exchange with the vicar before retreating to his room. "I thought it odd he spoke so little, especially given his recent quarrels with the family." "A quarrel, you say?" And what of Miss Eugenia? Has she been forthcoming about her presence here? Mrs. Goble's eyes narrowed. She is as elusive as the fog that rolls off the moors, my lord. Keeps to herself mostly, though she insists on overseeing the garden's upkeep, which strikes me as peculiar for a visitor. Wimsey nodded. Gardens can conceal many truths, Mrs. Goble. We must consider all possibilities. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the vicarage stairs. The door opened gently, and Jasper Garnock himself entered, a man worn by more than age, his face pale and drawn. His eyes, sharp yet haunted, fixed on Wimsey with a mixture of hope and dread. "Lord Peter," he began, voice uneven, "I trust you have found some clarity amid this unpleasantness." "Mr. Garnock, clarity is the pursuit of all detectives, yet seldom their immediate reward," Wimsey replied dryly, rising to meet the vicar's gaze. "Might I inquire about this letter you received? Its contents seem to have disturbed you greatly." The vicar hesitated before withdrawing a crumpled envelope from his coat pocket. "It arrived yesterday morning, postmarked London. No signature, only a note enclosed." He unfolded the paper with trembling hands. Wimsey took the letter, reading aloud with deliberate precision. "Beneath the stones you trust lies a truth you dread. Beware the shadows of your past, for they reach farther than your sermons." "A most cryptic message," Wimsey observed, eyes glinting with interest. "And, presumably, one that would unsettle any man of conscience." Garnock nodded. "It forced me to confront old wounds I'd hoped long buried. The crypt beneath the chancel, it holds more than the bones of ancestors. It guards a secret that could unravel all I have striven to conceal." "Secrets," Wimsey mused, "are the currency of tragedy, Mr. Garnock. Pray, what might this secret be?" Before Garnock could respond, a sharp rap sounded at the door. Entering was Miss Eugenia Lanyon, her face flushed and eyes alight with urgency. "Forgive my intrusion," she said quickly, "but I have just spoken with Mr. Bramble. There is something you should all see." Wimsey's interest piqued as she produced a small, folded piece of parchment, its edges browned with age. Mr. Bramble found this hidden in the vestry. A map, perhaps, or a key to the crypt's mysteries. The group gathered around the flickering firelight as Eugenia unfolded the parchment carefully. It depicted the church floor plan, marked with cryptic symbols and a discreet X beneath the altar. "A hidden passage," Wimsey said softly, tracing the line with his finger. "Concealed entrances are often the devil's accomplice in such tales." Garnock's face drained of color. "This must be why the letter warned me so. Someone seeks to reveal what I have tried to keep hidden." "And who, may I ask, would benefit from such revelations?" Wimsey pressed. The room fell silent, save for the faint ticking of the mantel clock, now sounding more resolute. Mrs. Goble broke the stillness. "There are those who covet the estate, the church's lands, and the legacy it carries. Robert Garnock is known to have pressed his uncle on matters of inheritance with increasing impatience." "A reasonable motive," Wimsey acknowledged. "Yet suspicion must not blind us to facts." He turned to Miss Lanyon. "And you, Miss Lanyon? Your interest in the church's architecture and the crypt suggests a personal stake." Eugenia met his gaze with steady resolve. "I come seeking truth, Lord Peter. My family's name was entwined with Lesser Hinckley long before the Garnocks. I believe the secrets buried here could explain much of my own history, and perhaps the reason for recent events." "Indeed," Wimsey said thoughtfully, "history is often a veil for present misdeeds." Determined to delve deeper, Wimsey arranged to visit the crypt at first light, yet the night held its own mysteries. As he retired, a final glance at the uneven mantel clock revealed something peculiar. The hands had shifted inexplicably, marking a time inconsistent with reality. The vicarage, it seemed, was not only a place of spiritual shelter, but a labyrinth of enigmas where time itself might be manipulated to mislead. As Lord Peter drifted into sleep, His mind danced among shadows and half-spoken threats, knowing the true story lay hidden beneath layers of deception, and, perhaps, within the very stones of the church. Morning would bring revelations, and with them the first step toward unmasking the puppet master behind the vicarage's deadly masquerade. The dawn was reluctant in Lesser Hinckley, casting a grey pallor over the village as Lord Peter Wimsey arrived once more at the vicarage. The previous evening's revelations weighed heavily upon him, yet his characteristic composure remained intact, as did the faint curl of irony at the corner of his mouth. There was, after all, a peculiar satisfaction in untangling human folly, especially when cloaked beneath a veneer of piety and ancient stone. The vicar, Jasper Garnock, was already awaiting him in the dimly lit library, a modest room lined with weathered tomes whose leather bindings spoke of forgotten sermons and long-past regrets. He looked more composed than the night before, though there was a distant shadow in his eyes that bespoke sleepless hours spent wrestling with invisible demons. "Lord Peter," Garnock said with a faint attempt at cheerfulness, "I trust your night was more restful than mine." "Alas, repose is seldom granted to those who ponder cryptic notes and subterranean mysteries," Wimsey replied dryly. "But I find the prospect of uncovering truth a sufficient stimulant." The vicar gestured toward the map found in the vestry. "This map, it confirms suspicions of a concealed crypt passage beneath the altar. I must admit, I had dismissed the notion as mere local legend." "Legends," Wimsey mused, "are often half-truths draped in superstition, which can serve either as warnings or misdirection. Our task is to discern which." Eugenia Lanyon arrived shortly after, her presence as determined and unsparing as ever. "I am ready to accompany you to the crypt," she announced. "There may be something there that could explain much. Perhaps even the source of recent tensions." Wimsey inclined his head. "Very well. The sooner we confront these shadows, the better." The trio set out through the church's worn nave, the morning light casting long shafts through stained glass, coloring the stone floors in somber reds and blues. The altar loomed ahead, its marble surface polished to a reflective sheen, yet betraying no hint of the hidden secret beneath. Wimsey crouched beside the base of the altar, inspecting the stonework. "Notice the slight irregularity here," he said, tapping a joint between slabs that was looser than the others. With a quiet effort, a panel shifted aside, revealing a narrow, dust-choked stairway spiraling downward. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls closing in with the claustrophobic intimacy of an ancient tomb. Flickering candles borrowed from the church illuminated cryptic carvings and a musty stillness that seemed to absorb sound itself. At the base, they found themselves in a chamber lined with niches, each housing skeletal remains clothed in the faded finery of forgotten generations. Yet the solemnity was disrupted by the unmistakable presence of a recent disturbance. Footprints pressed into the dust, a scuffed edge on one coffin, and, most tellingly, a faint, lingering scent of a peculiar spice, vaguely reminiscent of cinnamon and something metallic. Wimsey bent to examine the footprints. Fresh, no more than a day or two old, though somewhat indistinct due to the scattered debris. Whoever ventured here was cautious, yet not altogether discreet. Eugenia's eyes narrowed. Could it have been the vicar's nephew? Robert Garnock has been seen wandering about in odd hours. The vicar bristled. Robert's comportment is questionable, but I cannot believe he would desecrate this sacred space. "Nor do I," Wimsey interjected. "Motives are rarely as simple as they appear." A closer examination of the coffin with the disturbed edge revealed a small compartment carved into its side. Inside lay a tarnished locket, its clasp broken, and within it a faded miniature portrait of a woman bearing a striking resemblance to Eugenia. "This, I believe, is the linchpin," Wimsey observed, handing the locket to Eugenia. "A token long hidden, perhaps forgotten by all but the most vigilant." Eugenia clutched it tightly. My great-grandmother. I was told she vanished without a trace. And yet her story is entwined with this place, Whimsy said. The secret you seek may lie buried in family history as much as stone. The vicar interrupted softly. There is a diary, Lord Peter. Old, brittle, kept in the vestry. It belonged to my predecessor, one who took a keen interest in local affairs and the Lanyon lineage. You may find answers there. Returning to the vicarage, Whimsy requested the diary and began a meticulous perusal, his keen eye parsing between the faded script and cryptic annotations. The entries revealed a tangled web of past grievances, unacknowledged debts, and simmering resentments. A certain Reverend Lanyon, it appeared, had been deeply involved in disputes over property and inheritance, his rigid moral facade masking darker intentions. One passage caught Whimsy's attention. The veil between piety and pride is thinner than the stone that seals the crypt. Secrets best left undisturbed bring ruin to those who pry. Whimsy's lips curled in sardonic amusement. A clergyman with a flair for the dramatic, it seems. Eugenia leaned over his shoulder. What of the dispute over inheritance, Lord Peter? Might it have provoked a motive for murder? Possibly. But the inheritance, while a tangible stake, seldom drives men to the depths of deceit and danger without a more personal impetus. Jealousy, fear, or the need to control. The vicar, standing nearby, sighed heavily. Robert has always been hot-tempered, but it is the late hours he keeps that trouble me most. Last night I found his room empty, his bed untouched, as if he had left in haste. Whimsy's eyes sharpened, and where might Mr. Robert Garnock have gone at such an hour? Before Garnock could respond, a soft rap at the door announced the arrival of Constable Harrow, a burly man with a blunt manner but a grudging respect for Whimsy's methods. Lord Peter, he said, we've found something at the village inn. One of the servants reported seeing Robert there, late last night, speaking with a man none of us know. They were quite agitated. Whimsy arched an eyebrow. A clandestine meeting under the cover of darkness. Intriguing. Who was this mystery companion? The constable shook his head. No one could say. He wore a hat pulled low, spoke with an accent foreign to these parts. Foreign, you say? Eugenia murmured. Could this be the key to the cryptic letter and the threats? Whimsy's thoughts churned as the timeline snapped into place. Robert's disappearance, the letter, the secret passages, the locket, and now a mysterious stranger. It all hinted at a wider conspiracy, carefully concealed beneath the village's serene surface. Constable, gather what you can about this stranger, Whimsy ordered, and send word to the nearest railway station. We must know if anyone fitting this description arrived recently. As the constable departed, Whimsy turned to the vicar and Eugenia. The pieces are assembling, though the picture remains incomplete. There is a pattern here, one of concealment and revelation, where time itself may be manipulated to confuse and confound. Manipulated time? Eugenia questioned. Indeed, Whimsy replied, eyes gleaming. Recall the mantel clock at the vicarage, which marked an impossible hour. Such small discrepancies are often clues in themselves, distractions or signals. He tapped his temple with a gloved finger. Human minds are prone to accept what seems plausible rather than what is true, especially under pressure. It is in those moments of false certainty that a cunning criminal weaves their greatest deception. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Whimsy set about reconstructing the day's events with painstaking care, interrogating servants anew and cross-examining alibis. Each account, though superficially consistent, bore subtle contradictions, a stutter in timing, a misremembered phrase, a glance exchanged too quickly. The vicar's household, it seemed, was a theatre of half-truths and guarded motives, and in the center of the stage, the crypt awaited, silent and inscrutable, its secrets poised to unsettle all who dared unlock them. As night approached, the detective prepared to descend once more into the gloom beneath the altar, armed with fresh insights and a resolve sharpened by logic and intuition. The truth, he knew, lay in the shadows, waiting patiently to be revealed. The crypt's chill clung to Whimsy's bones as he descended the spiral stairs once more, Eugenia and the vicar close behind. The air grew heavier with each step, redolent of damp, stone, and a faint trace of that peculiar spice, the scent that had so unnerved him. He glanced sideways at Eugenia, whose pale countenance mirrored a quiet apprehension, though her eyes betrayed a keen determination. The scent again, Whimsy murmured. Not a natural emanation of this place. Some exotic spice, perhaps used in ceremonial fashion, or, more likely, a tool of distraction. The vicar shivered. It conjures uncomfortable memories of a certain traveler who once sought sanctuary here. An adventurer with strange habits and an unsettling smile. Curious, Whimsy remarked. And this traveler's name? Ernest Halverstone. A man of dubious reputation whose arrival coincided oddly with my predecessor's death and subsequent troubles in the parish. The name pricked at Whimsy's memory, like a loose thread in a finely woven tapestry. We must learn more about Mr. Halverstone. His involvement, if any, could illuminate much. The chamber beyond the stairwell was larger than before, its vaulted ceiling blackened with age and neglect. Rows of ancient tombs lined the walls, their inscriptions worn but legible, names from centuries past, long departed yet immortalized in stone. Whimsy's eyes sought anomalies, something out of place, a hint among the solemn silence. His glance settled on a narrow recess, partially obscured by shadow. Approaching, he found a recently disturbed patch of dust. "Someone has been here," he observed. "Quite recently." From the recess, he retrieved a small metal box, its surface dulled with tarnish, but clearly sealed with a fragile clasp. Opening it cautiously, revealed a collection of folded papers. Letters, some stained and brittle, others freshly inked, their contents a mixture of personal correspondence and cryptic notations. Whimsy read aloud. "The time is short. The inheritance must not pass to the undeserving. Trust none but those who know the truth of the crypt. The locket is the key. Without it, all is lost." Eugenia stiffened. "This confirms what I feared. The family secrets run deeper than I imagined." The vicar frowned. "And who might be deemed undeserving in this context?" "That, Reverend, is the question," Whimsy replied. "The writer speaks with a certainty born of knowledge and desperation. It suggests a conspiracy within the family itself." One letter bore the signature E.H., undeniably Ernest Halverstone. A man who, according to village gossip, had been obsessed with the Lanyon inheritance and the crypt's mysteries. Whimsy's mind whirred. If Halverstone believed the locket to be the key, then its discovery by Eugenia is no mere coincidence. As they sifted through the documents, another detail emerged, a carefully drawn plan of the crypt, marking a hidden chamber not yet uncovered. The drawing depicted a narrow passage behind one of the tombs, leading to a smaller vault. "Have you ever heard of such a chamber?" Whimsy inquired. The vicar shook his head. "No, if it exists, it must have been sealed off long ago." Determined, Whimsy directed the search. After some effort, Eugenia pressed against a loose stone in the wall. It yielded with a faint grinding sound. The stone slid aside to reveal a narrow doorway, shrouded in darkness. With candles lit, they entered the hidden chamber, a small vault lined with dusty crates and, in one corner, a plain wooden box, locked but unadorned. Inside, they found documents, ledgers, and a collection of papers, revealing a tangled web of financial transactions, falsified wills, and clandestine agreements. "These papers," Whimsy said gravely, "paint a picture of manipulation and greed. The estate was burdened with debts, carefully concealed from the public eye." Eugenia's fingers trembled as she read a note referencing an agreement signed under duress. one that stripped her great-grandmother of certain rights and property. It seems the family was divided, not just by pride or passion, but by legal machinations designed to exclude. Wimsey examined a ledger with meticulous care. There are payments here to unknown individuals, masked by vague descriptions, consulting fees, security expenses, discretionary allowances. He looked up sharply. The mystery man at the inn, was he one of these shadowy recipients, perhaps a mercenary, or agent acting on behalf of those who wished to keep these secrets hidden? The vicar's face grew pale. If so, the danger to our family and estate is greater than I feared. Wimsey nodded slowly, his mind piecing together the puzzle. We must confront Robert Garnock with this knowledge. His secret meetings, his sudden nocturnal absences, all suggest he is either involved or being manipulated. They returned to the vicarage, where Robert's room was again suspiciously empty. The household murmured with gossip and suspicion, the servants exchanging nervous glances. "Have you noticed anything unusual about Robert's behavior?" Wimsey asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Pettigrew. Mrs. Pettigrew hesitated, then whispered, "He's been restless, sir, often talking to himself and sometimes locking himself away for hours. And there's been a strange man, a visitor at odd hours, always wearing that hat pulled low." "Have you seen this man's face?" Wimsey pressed. "No, my lord, but the boy's been given letters, secret ones. He hides them carefully." Wimsey's eyes glittered. Letters again. A correspondence hidden from prying eyes. The plot thickens. Soon after, the constable reported the stranger's identity. Ernest Halverstone was no mere adventurer, but a disgraced solicitor, once involved in fraudulent dealings and recently released from prison. His connection to the village was no accident. He had been conspiring to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his, through manipulation and intimidation. Wimsey considered this carefully. Halverstone's return threatens not only the estate, but the fragile peace of this community. His influence over Robert may explain much. Later that evening, Wimsey summoned Robert for an interview. The young man appeared disheveled and wary, his eyes darting nervously. "Robert," Wimsey began gently, "you have been troubled. Will you tell me what it is that weighs upon you?" Robert swallowed hard. "It's the family, sir, the secrets, the pressure, and Halverstone. He promised to help me, to make things right, but I fear I've been a pawn." "Fear often clouds judgment," Wimsey replied, "but you must understand the truth. The locket your cousin found, why was it so important?" Robert's voice cracked. "It belonged to my aunt. She disappeared years ago, leaving behind whispers and unanswered questions. Halverstone said it held proof of her rightful claim to the estate." Wimsey's gaze hardened. "And was that proof genuine or a fabrication designed to mislead?" Robert shook his head, tears glistening. "I don't know, but I cannot live with this burden." The confession was a key turning point, revealing the psychological entanglement of guilt, loyalty, and manipulation that lay beneath the surface. Wimsey rose, his expression resolute. "We shall uncover the truth, Robert, and put these shadows to rest." As the night deepened, Wimsey reviewed the evidence once more. The forged documents, the secret passage, the letters, the mysterious visitor, and the fractured family bonds. The stage was set for a revelation, one that would expose not only the mechanics of the crime, but the complex human motivations behind it. In the quiet moments before dawn, he allowed himself a rare smile. The mystery was far from solved, yet the path was clear. Logic, observation, and patience would guide him to the truth lurking beneath the ancient stones of Lesser Hinckley. The morning mist clung to the stonework of the vicarage as Lord Peter Wimsey rose early, his mind racing with the tangled threads of the mystery. The revelations from the previous evening had uncovered a labyrinth of secrets, yet the heart of the puzzle remained obscured beneath layers of family discord and veiled threats. He knew that patience and precision were paramount. The truth would reveal itself only through careful probing of the fragile alliances and concealed motives that bound Lesser Hinckley's troubled inhabitants. Over breakfast, the vicar moved with a weary solemnity, weighed down by the burden of knowledge he could scarcely share. Eugenia's gaze lingered on the locket resting beside her plate, its dull gleam a silent reminder of a history marred by loss and betrayal. Whimsy, as always, observed with quiet acuity, noting the subtle shifts in their expressions that spoke louder than words. "There is much at stake here," the vicar admitted at last. "Not merely property or reputation, but the very soul of this parish and the legacy we choose to embrace or reject." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed. But it is only by confronting the darkness openly that healing may begin. Concealment breeds suspicion, and suspicion, in turn, breeds violence." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, and Constable Harrow entered, his face grave. "Lord Peter, I have news. A witness has come forward. Mrs. Millicent Carrow, the innkeeper's wife. She claims to have overheard a heated exchange between Robert Garnock and Ernest Halverston the night before last." Whimsy's interest sharpened. "What did they say?" The constable took a breath. "Words of betrayal and desperation. Mrs. Carrow said Robert accused Halverston of using him, of scheming to seize the estate by any means necessary. Halverston, in turn, warned Robert to keep silent or suffer the consequences." The vicar's knuckles whitened on the table. "This confirms my fears. The conflict runs deep and is no longer confined to whispered rumors." Whimsy rose, a resolve hardening within him. "We must speak with Mrs. Carrow immediately and learn all she knows. The shadows lengthen and the truth edges closer." At the inn, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Mrs. Carrow, a stout woman with keen eyes softened by years of hardship, greeted them hesitantly. She led them to a quiet corner where, away from prying ears, she recounted the night's events in careful detail. "I was cleaning the parlor when I heard voices from the back room," she began. "Robert was angry, desperate. He said he felt trapped, that Halverston promised him freedom but only tightened his chains. Halverston replied coldly, saying the estate, and all its secrets, would be his soon enough. He threatened Robert, saying anyone who interfered would pay dearly." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Eugenia. "Did they mention the locket or the crypt?" Mrs. Carrow nodded slowly. "Yes, the locket. Halverston said it was the key to unlocking what the family wanted buried forever." The detective's mind raced. The locket, the hidden chamber, the forged documents, all formed a web designed to ensnare and divide. But what remained unclear was the ultimate aim. Was Halverston's pursuit purely material, or was something more sinister at play? Back at the vicarage, Whimsy assembled the household, sensing that confrontation was inevitable. Robert's eyes were downcast, his posture tense as he awaited what would come. Eugenia's presence lent an air of quiet dignity to the gathering, her expression resolute. "Robert," Whimsy began gently, "the path before you is fraught with peril, but silence will only deepen the shadows. If you have been manipulated, now is the time to speak clearly." Robert swallowed, then nodded. "It's true. Halverston promised he could restore my family's honor and rights. He told me to keep the locket safe and hidden, to obey without question, but he's ruthless. I fear what he might do next." The vicar's voice cracked with emotion. "And did he harm my predecessor, the Reverend Lanyon?" Robert shook his head vehemently. "No, I swear it, but Halverston spoke darkly of sacrifices and debts unpaid. I think my uncle's death was a warning, proof of his power." Whimsy's gaze narrowed. "Then we must act quickly to prevent further tragedy. Tell me, has Halverston been seen lately in the village?" "Last night he was spotted near the crypt entrance, despite the warnings," Robert admitted. "I think he's searching for something he believes is hidden there." Without hesitation, Whimsy gathered his companions. We will return to the crypt once more, this time with caution and purpose. The final piece awaits." As they approached the church, a strange stillness hung in the air, broken only by the distant toll of the bell. The heavy wooden door groaned as they pushed it open, revealing the familiar nave now bathed in the pale light of dusk. They moved toward the altar with practiced ease, the panels sliding aside to grant them access to the shadowed stairs. Descending, their footsteps echoed softly in the ancient silence. Reaching the hidden chamber, Whimsy examined the walls, searching for the concealed passage the letters had described. After a moment, his fingers traced a faint seam, and a loose stone shifted to reveal a narrow corridor beyond. Torchlight flickered as they advanced, the passage narrowing until it opened into a small vault. Here lay a simple wooden chest, its surface marred by age and neglect. The lock was old, yet unbroken, its secret preserved by time itself. With care, Whimsy picked the lock, the mechanism clicking open to reveal contents that took their breath away. A bundle of letters, faded photographs, and a sealed envelope embossed with a family crest. Eugenia reached for the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. This could change everything. Inside, they found a confession penned in a delicate hand. It detailed a long-buried scandal involving forged documents, betrayal among kin, and a desperate attempt to conceal a grievous wrong. The letter implicated Ernest Halverston as the architect of deception, orchestrating a campaign of intimidation and manipulation to seize the estate for himself. "The truth at last," Whimsy whispered, eyes scanning the lines. "But this alone will not end the conflict. We must confront Halverston and expose him." Suddenly, a noise echoed from the corridor behind them, a soft, deliberate footfall. They turned as a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Ernest Halverston himself, face pale but eyes gleaming with a dangerous fire. "So, you have found my little secret," he said, voice low and menacing. "But it changes nothing. The estate, the power, it will be mine, and no one, not even the likes of you, will stop me." Whimsy stepped forward calmly. "Mr. Halverston, your schemes are uncovered, your threats laid bare. It is over." Halverston laughed bitterly. "Over? No, Lord Peter, this is but the opening act." Before anyone could react, a sudden scuffle erupted. Halverston lunged for a hidden dagger, but Whimsy was quicker. With a swift motion, he disarmed the man, pinning him against the cold stone wall. "Enough," Whimsy commanded. "The law will judge you, but the truth cannot be hidden any longer." As constables arrived to take Halverston into custody, Eugenia clutched the locket tightly, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and sorrow. The long night of secrets was ending, but the scars it left would linger. Walking back through the crypt's shadows, Whimsy reflected on the fragile nature of trust and the burdens families bear when history is shrouded in silence. The path to justice was never simple, but it was the only path worth following. Outside, dawn broke anew over Lesser Hinckley, promising light where darkness had once held sway. The cold grip of the night had given way to a hesitant dawn, yet the chill lingered in the corridors of Lesser Hinckley's ancient church, where the echoes of the previous evening's confrontation still seemed to reverberate. Lord Peter Whimsy, despite the long hours and the weight of revelations, was the first to arrive, his mind turning over each fact with the precision of a watchmaker scrutinizing cogs and springs. There was no satisfaction yet, only the persistent pull of questions demanding answers. The arrest of Ernest Halverston had seemed to promise an end, yet Whimsy's instincts whispered caution. The confession found in the dusty vault was damning, certainly, but it was a fragment, a single tile in a mosaic that might yet conceal darker truth. He knew well the art of deception. Sometimes the most conspicuous evidence was a deliberate distraction, a flourish to misdirect the keenest eye. As the church doors opened behind him, a tall, angular figure stepped into the pale light. Constable Harrow, his usual air of officious restraint replaced by something less certain. "Lord Peter, there's been an incident at the vicarage. Miss Eugenia requested my presence urgently." Whimsy's eyebrows lifted, the flicker of a sardonic smile playing about his lips. "The fair lady summons the constable. How delightfully Victorian." They walked briskly back through the village, the dawn mist curling around their feet like a silken shroud. At the vicarage, Eugenia awaited them in the library, her usual composure shadowed by worry. The locket lay open on the table before her, the delicate engraving catching the morning light. "Lord Peter," she said without preamble, "I found this among my uncle's papers after the arrest. It's a ledger, detailed accounts of transactions, gifts, and debts. What strikes me is the sheer volume of payments to Halverston over the years, far beyond any reasonable loan or repayment." Whimsy leaned over the ledger, his keen eyes scanning columns of figures with practiced ease. "Financial entanglements, then. A web of obligation binding your family to Mr. Halverston." "Yes," Eugenia confirmed, "but there's more. Several entries reference special services and discretionary fees. I fear there are secrets here that go beyond mere money." The constable rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "This could explain the threats, my lord. Halverston held power through leverage, not just on paper, but over people's lives." Whimsy tapped a slender finger on the ledger. "This corroborates what Mrs. Carrow told us. The locket as a key, the secret chamber, the letters, all tools in a campaign of control. But who else might be implicated?" Eugenia's eyes darkened. "There is someone else. My late uncle's closest confidant, Mr. Geoffrey Mallory. He vanished the day after Reverend Lanyon's death. No one has seen or heard from him since." The detective's interest sharpened. "An associate who disappears at a critical juncture. One must assume complicity or flight. Have you any idea where he might be?" "None," Eugenia said. "But I found a note among my uncle's papers. It mentions a cottage by the sea, a place Mallory frequented in better times. It might be our only lead." Whimsy stood, the gears turning visibly behind his genteel demeanor. "Then we must pursue this lead at once. Secrets buried in the heart of Lesser Hinckley may have roots reaching beyond the parish boundaries." The journey to the coastal cottage was quiet, but charged with anticipation. The landscape shifted from the tangled hedgerows of the village to the wild, salt-scented expanse of cliffs and crashing waves. The cottage itself was an austere structure, weather-beaten and isolated, perched precariously near the edge of the shore. They found the door ajar, the interior faintly disturbed but largely untouched. Whimsy's gaze swept the room, noting the faded photographs, a scattering of papers, and a solitary chair turned away from the window. On the table lay a book of poetry, its spine cracked, a bookmark placed neatly between the pages of a particularly somber sonnet. "Mallory was a man of refined tastes," Whimsy mused, "yet something in this place speaks of retreat, perhaps even despair." Eugenia picked up a folded letter from the desk. The handwriting was precise, yet the tone trembled with urgency. It was a confession, or perhaps a plea, a warning that the tangled affairs of the Garnick family were entwined with darker deeds than anyone had suspected. Mallory wrote of a pact made in desperation, a binding promise to protect the estate's secrets at any cost. He hinted at blackmail, threats veiled in politeness, and the crushing weight of loyalty twisted into servitude. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. Loyalty, yes, but to whom, and at what price? Their exploration was interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside, cautious but deliberate. A figure emerged from the shadows, the village apothecary, Mr. Toller, his face pale and drawn. "I feared I might be too late," he said quietly. "Mallory sent me a message before he disappeared, warning of a trap set for those who dig too deep." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Eugenia. "What trap?" Toller hesitated, then revealed a secret that chilled the very air. The crypt beneath the church was rigged, the walls concealing more than just family secrets. There were mechanisms designed to entrap or worse those who dared uncover the truth. Halverston knew, Toller said grimly. He prepared the crypt to be his final safeguard. The detective's mind raced. The crypt was no mere vault. It was a fortress of shadows and danger. Every element of the mystery, the forged documents, the locket, the ledger, the threats, pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan to maintain control through fear and cunning. Back in the village, the atmosphere grew more charged. Rumors whispered in hushed tones, eyes darted nervously behind curtains, and the vicarage became a center of uneasy attention. Whimsy, ever the outsider yet deeply embedded in the human drama, prepared for what was to come. The next steps would demand more than deduction. They would require courage and confrontation. As twilight deepened, he reviewed the evidence once more, the inconsistencies in the timeline, the motives buried beneath layers of deception, the psychological tensions that simmered beneath polite smiles. And through it all, the shadow of Mallory's disappearance loomed large, a ghost that might yet hold the key to unraveling the Gordian knot of Lesser Hinckley's darkest secret. In that moment, Lord Peter Wimsey knew the path ahead was perilous, but the game was far from over. The trap awaited, and only by stepping into the darkness could the truth finally be illuminated. The days that followed were marked by a curious combination of anxious anticipation and methodical inquiry, the kind that suited Lord Peter Wimsey's particular talents. A disciplined mind married to a restless curiosity, tempered by a dry wit that never failed to disarm. The village of Lesser Hinckley, normally wrapped in the comfortable cocoon of its own history and manners, now seemed to vibrate with unseen tensions. Doors closed a fraction more quickly when strangers passed. Eyes that had once welcomed with mild suspicion now narrowed in guarded calculation. Even the church, that emblem of enduring sanctity, felt less a sanctuary and more a bastion guarding fragile secrets. Wimsey, accompanied by Constable Harrow and Eugenia Garnock, convened once more in the vicarage's drawing room, a chamber still heavy with the scent of burning peat and fading roses. The ledger, the locket, and Mallory's letter lay strewn across the scarred writing desk, a tableau of fragments waiting to be pieced together. Yet it was not mere paper that held the key, but the human element beneath it all. Mr. Toller's warning about the crypt's mechanism, Wimsey began, adjusting his monocle with the air of a man about to deliver a particularly delicate reprimand, must not be underestimated. We know that Halverston was a man who preferred to maintain control until his very last breath. Eugenia nodded, her fingers clutching a porcelain teacup with white knuckles. Do you believe someone else is involved? Someone who would use this trap? Indeed, Wimsey replied, steepling his fingers. The disappearance of Mallory, the suspicious movements in the village, these are not mere coincidences. They suggest an accomplice, or at the very least, someone complicit in extending Halverston's shadow beyond the grave. Constable Harrow cleared his throat. We've gathered what evidence we can, but the crypt remains sealed. The church wardens are reluctant to disturb it without proper cause, and who can blame them? It is a sacred place. Wimsey allowed himself a faint smile. Sacred, yes, but not inviolate. The truth, after all, has a habit of asserting itself, even in consecrated soil. With the morning light growing softer through mullioned windows, the detective proposed a plan. We must test the crypt ourselves, but carefully, slowly. First, a survey of the church interior, focusing on the walls, floors, and doors for any unusual mechanisms or disturbances. Their search yielded subtle clues. A faint scuff near the base of the crypt's iron door, barely visible, and a series of minute scratches along the stone threshold, marks consistent with something heavy having been dragged or manipulated. Wimsey crouched, examining the metalwork closely. Do you see these tiny grooves? He said. Not random at all. Someone has been here recently. The constable frowned. But who would dare, and for what purpose? The same who seeks to preserve their secrets, Whimsy answered, and perhaps to discourage further inquiry by any means necessary. Later that day, while Eugenia sorted through her late uncle's correspondence, Whimsy made a discreet inquiry among the villagers, especially those who worked closely with Halverston or Mallory. His questions were always polite, his tone light, yet beneath the surface they were needles probing the fabric of hidden truths. It was during these conversations that a pattern emerged, a constellation of minor but telling contradictions. Mrs. Carrow, the housekeeper at the Garnock estate, insisted she had no knowledge of any secret dealings beyond the usual household finances. Yet she stumbled, briefly, when asked about the timing of a certain delivery the night of Reverend Lanyon's death. Her eyes flickered toward the mantelpiece, and a faint tremor betrayed her otherwise unflappable demeanor. The village blacksmith, an otherwise gruff man named Dobbs, mentioned an overheard argument near the churchyard, an incident never reported to the authorities. Two voices, she said, one harsh, one pleading. It ended with a door slamming. Whimsy's mind ticked over the detail. The time, the location, it aligned perfectly with the moments before the murder was discovered. Yet the most telling came from young Betsy, a maidservant with a habit of eavesdropping and an affection for gossip masked by childlike innocence. She spoke of a man she had seen lurking near the vicarage late at night, a stranger with sharp eyes and a furtive manner. A foreigner, she said, but not one of those common tradesfolk, Whimsy recalled later, a shadow out of place, whose presence unsettled even the local dogs. The picture was becoming clearer. A network of fear and deceit, a tale of power wielded not openly, but in whispers and shadows. Yet the precise mechanism of control, the identity of those who wielded it, remained tantalizingly out of reach. That evening, as the village sank into uneasy silence, Whimsy sat by the fire, pondering the cryptic messages and veiled threats. The name Mallory repeated itself like a refrain in his thoughts, a man caught between loyalty and conscience, whose disappearance was no accident, but a calculated move in a game far larger than mere murder. He turned to Eugenia, who had been quietly watching him. "Miss Garnock, do you believe your uncle would have condoned the methods used to silence the Reverend?" Her reply was steady but fraught with sadness. "No, my lord. He was a man of principle, but also of great pride. Perhaps too much pride for his own good." Whimsy nodded, the familiar blend of sympathy and skepticism tightening his features. Pride is often the prelude to downfall, but it can also blind us to dangers closer to home. As the fire's glow softened the room, the detective's thoughts settled on the next step. The crypt was more than a vault. It was a stage, and soon the players would be revealed. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning, not just for the dead Reverend Lanyon, but for all whose lives had become entwined in the labyrinth of Lesser Hinckley's secrets. Whimsy, cigar poised elegantly between finger and thumb, allowed himself a brief smile. The game was intensifying, and he relished the challenge. For beneath the veneer of civility and the scent of burning peat, the truth awaited. Patient, unyielding, and utterly inexorable. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the lanes of Lesser Hinckley as Lord Peter Whimsy made his way back toward the vicarage. The chill was not entirely atmospheric. A subtle tension hung over the village, as if the earth itself awaited some inevitable disclosure. The hours since his last consultation had seen the arrival of new visitors, police reinforcements, curious townsfolk, and a few solemn acquaintances of Reverend Lanyon, each carrying their own whispered theories and concealed anxieties. Whimsy's gait was measured, each step deliberate, as if he walked the margins of a chessboard whose pieces were shifting beneath his feet. The events unfolding demanded a delicate hand and the kind of patience honed over years of puzzles that wore away the veneer of civility to reveal human frailty beneath. Upon entering the vicarage drawing-room, he found Constable Harrow and Eugenia Garnock engaged in quiet discussion. The atmosphere was subdued, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. The constable looked up, his usually blunt expression softened by an uncharacteristic gravity. "We have succeeded in gaining access to the crypt," Harrow announced. "With permission from the church wardens and proper care, we were able to breach the outer door without triggering any traps. It appears the mechanism was not as perilous as feared, more a deterrent than a device of death." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. As we had surmised, the terror was intended less to harm than to intimidate. From an adjacent corner, Eugenia spoke softly. "Inside, we found evidence of recent disturbance. The soil was freshly turned, and there were faint marks on the flagstones as if something heavy had been shifted." "Precisely," Whimsy said, lighting a cigar and inhaling deeply before continuing. "Our missing Mr. Mallory appears to have made use of this subterranean sanctuary. The question is, what was he concealing, and to what end?" The detective's eyes flicked to the ledgers and personal effects retrieved from the crypt. They had yet to be examined thoroughly, but their presence hinted at a secret far beyond the usual parish records or family memorabilia. With little delay, Whimsy led the others into the crypt itself, descending the narrow stone steps into a cool, shadowed chamber. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and old stone, mingled with the sharp tang of iron from the crypt door. The space was modest but meticulously maintained. An array of coffins and memorial plaques lined the walls, while in the center lay a heavy oak chest, its surface worn but secure. It was evident this was the focal point of the concealment. "Observe the locks," Whimsy instructed. "They are of varied design, suggesting different levels of security applied over time. The chest is relatively recent, a late addition perhaps by Halverston or one of his successors." He produced a small leather pouch from his coat and withdrew a set of slender tools, employing them with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to both puzzles and subtlety. Within moments, a soft click echoed in the chamber, and the chest lid creaked open. Inside were several bundles of documents, tied with ribbons now faded to a dusty rose, and a small sealed envelope bearing the unmistakable crest of the Garnock family. A griffin clutching a sword. Eugenia stepped forward, her fingers trembling slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. She read aloud, "My dearest Eugenia, should this letter ever find you, know that your uncle's path has been fraught with shadows deeper than any man might willingly explore. The truth of the manor's legacy is entwined with more than mere inheritance or parish duty. It is a tale of loyalty, betrayal, and sacrifice, held fast in silence to protect those we hold dear. Trust no one wholly. Seek the lantern that shines beyond the veil. Edward Garnock." The words sent a shiver through the room, despite the calm certainty with which they were spoken. Whimsy's brow furrowed, not at the letter's sentiment, but at its cryptic nature. "A classic misdirection," he mused. "A call to vigilance, but deliberately vague enough to foster paranoia. Yet it confirms the presence of secrets worth hiding." Harrow, ever the pragmatist, asked, "What lantern? What veil? Are we to believe this is some form of coded instruction or a reference to a person?" "Possibly both," Whimsy replied. "Such language is a common ruse among those versed in intrigue. But more importantly, it signals that your uncle was aware of threats beyond the ordinary, likely internal conflicts that could explain his demise." The investigation now had a new dimension, a hidden history layered beneath the surface of the village's quiet exterior. Later, while examining the papers, Whimsy discovered several documents indicating financial transactions and land agreements that bore irregular signatures and ambiguous dates. These discrepancies suggested a dispute over the manor's ownership and its revenues, a conflict that had been carefully concealed from public view. One letter in particular stood out, an unsigned note addressed to Edward Garnock, accusing him of misappropriation and threatening exposure unless certain demands were met. The handwriting was meticulous yet impatient, the tone acidic. Who would gain by accusing a man of his own class? Eugenia asked, puzzlement creasing her forehead. Enemies can wear many faces, Whimsy replied. Family rivalries, disgruntled tenants, or those nursing a grudge under the guise of propriety. The complexity of such disputes often fosters concealment, deception, and, ultimately, tragedy. The day waned, but the threads of inquiry continued to intertwine with unexpected intricacy. A newly uncovered ledger from Halverston's steward recorded unusual expenses, payments to a mysterious Mr. X for services described only as special arrangements. No further details, no receipts, no witnesses. Whimsy's voice took on a note of dry irony as he remarked, "Our dear Halverston may have employed a ghost, or perhaps a puppeteer manipulating his strings from the shadows." It was becoming clear that Reverend Lanyon's death was but the surface ripple of a deeper disturbance, an undercurrent of betrayal and concealed ambitions. That evening, back in the drawing room, the detective gathered Eugenia and the constable once more. "We have pieced together enough to form a working hypothesis," Whimsy said, pacing slowly. "Mallory's disappearance was deliberate. He is either the keeper of these secrets or the victim of their revelation. The financial irregularities and veiled threats paint a picture of a struggle for power concealed beneath layers of etiquette and faith." Eugenia's eyes shone with a mixture of dread and resolve. "Then the time has come to confront those who would keep us in darkness." Harrow nodded, grim-faced. "I will ensure the village is prepared. No one leaves Lesser Hinckley without explanation." Whimsy smiled thinly. "Excellent. For in the quietest of villages, the loudest truths often lie hidden, awaiting their inevitable unveiling." As the fire dwindled and shadows lengthened, the detective's mind raced ahead. The forthcoming confrontation would require all his finesse. The gentle unmasking of a killer who hid behind respectability and the calculated manipulation of time and place. With a final puff of his cigar, Lord Peter Whimsy resolved that tomorrow the truth would begin to emerge from the crypt's cold embrace, and the game would reach its most compelling and most dangerous act. The gathering at Lesser Hinckley's vicarage was, by common standards, quite the spectacle, though none would describe it as such without a certain reluctance and a well-practiced veneer of propriety. The drawing-room, usually a haven of genteel conversation and subdued ornamentation, had been transformed into a stage for the denouement that Lord Peter Whimsy had long anticipated. Guests, suspects, and villagers alike had been summoned under the pretense of a routine inquest update, but Whimsy's keen eye detected the taut nerves beneath their composed facade. The room hummed with an expectant silence, punctuated only by the occasional clearing of a throat or the discreet adjustment of a glove. Whimsy himself appeared as one might expect, impeccably dressed in his customary tweeds, a cigar poised but unlit between slender fingers, and an expression that combined polite amusement with the gravitas of a man who had spent several hours sorting human fallacies into neat compartments. "My friends," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "we have traversed a rather labyrinthine path, fraught with half-truths, misleading gestures, and the occasional desperate concealment. Tonight I propose to illuminate the shadows that have so thoroughly enshrouded Lesser Hinckley, and to explain the curious fate of Reverend Lanyon." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. "To begin, let us recall the cryptic note from Mr. Edward Garnock. It warned of shadows and veils, and urged caution. But what shadows did it mean? What veil obscured the truth?" A ripple passed through the assembled company, some stiffening, others exchanging glances. "The answer," Whimsy said, "lies not in the supernatural, but in the all-too-human dramas of jealousy, fear, and ambition. The forged documents, the irregular payments, and the veiled threats all point to a struggle for control of the manor's considerable estate. However, this struggle was not solely financial. It was, in essence, a battle over legacy, honor, and the preservation of a family's name. He turned to Eugenia Garnock, who met his gaze steadily, though with a flicker of apprehension. "Your uncle, Edward Garnock, was engaged in a covert campaign to unmask and thwart a shadowy faction within his own family, one that sought to wrest control through deceit and intimidation." Wimsey drew a deep breath before proceeding. "The key figure in this clandestine faction is none other than your cousin, Philip Halverstone. His bitter resentment and envy, fueled by years of being sidelined and undermined, culminated in a plot to silence Edward and secure his own ascendancy." The room seemed to contract in on itself as murmurs arose, quickly stifled by a commanding gesture from Wimsey. "Now, as to the Reverend's demise," Wimsey said, his tone turning precise and clipped. "It was no accident, nor a random act of violence. It was a carefully staged incident designed to appear as an unfortunate consequence of the soup being too hot, a seemingly trivial grievance used to mask a more calculated crime." He stepped toward a small side table, lifting a delicate porcelain soup bowl for emphasis. The fatal poison was administered not in the main serving, but in a second, private portion prepared for Reverend Lanyon. The murderer relied on the assumption that no one would suspect such a mundane cause. Wimsey's eyes swept the room before settling on Halverstone, whose composed facade finally cracked, revealing a flicker of panic. "But how, you ask, was the deception maintained?" Wimsey continued. "Consider the timing of the crypt's disturbance and the subtle manipulations of the household clocks, both designed to create false alibis and confuse any investigation. The missing salver, the altered ledger entries, and the silenced servants all played their part in this theatrical ruse." Halverstone attempted to interrupt, but Wimsey raised a hand. "Please allow me to conclude," he said dryly. The final piece fell into place with the confession overheard by the maid, whose reticence was born of fear rather than complicity. "It was she who heard your whispered threats, your demands that Edward recant his accusations or face irreparable consequences." The tension broke as Halverstone's resolve crumbled. His protestations gave way to a stammered admission, his eyes darting nervously. "Yes, he began, then faltered, finally conceding, "I did what I must to preserve my birthright. I never meant to kill the Reverend. It was only meant to frighten him into silence." Wimsey's expression softened imperceptibly. Intentions, however, do not absolve consequences. As the constables moved to take Halverstone into custody, Eugenia exhaled a breath she seemed not to know she had been holding. Wimsey offered her a thin, reassuring smile. "Justice, Miss Garnock, is seldom swift nor clean, but it is inevitable. The shadows are lifted and the veil is drawn back. Lesser Hinckley may now breathe a little easier." Lighting his cigar at last, Lord Peter turned to the assembled company. "I shall take my leave with a modest quotation, as is my wont. The truth is rarely pure and never simple, but it is, fortunately, attainable." With that, he tipped his hat and departed into the evening mist, leaving behind a room filled with relief, lingering questions, and the faintest trace of his wry, indelible presence.